evening. Tonight my guest is Bruce Sinofsky, the co-producer and co-director of two award-winning documentaries, Brother's Keeper from 1992 and currently Paradise Lost. Bruce, nice to meet you.
Good to see you. How are you?
Bruce, before we have a lot going here tonight. First of all, give me a little background of yourself.
Well, let's see. I live in Montclair, New Jersey now. I grew up outside of Boston, Massachusetts. I went to NYU Film School back in the 70s, and I've been working, productively in the film business for the last 20 years.
Where did you really get your start in filmmaking?
I was fortunate to get a job working for the Maisel brothers, who were seminal documentary filmmakers from the 60s who made films like Gimme Shelter and Grey Gardens and Salesman. And I came to them while I was at NYU in '77, and I worked there until 1991, when my partner and I, Joe, left there, Joe also worked there, and started the editing process on Brother's Keeper that led us to where we are today, which is a successful nonfiction film company that does commercials and corporate films, and every 2 or 3 years comes out with what I consider to be among the best nonfiction films that that hit the theaters.
Only because I'm concerned about Joe's mother. What's Joe's last name?
Joe Berlinger. Yeah,
you're going to hear from Joe.
Don't want Joe to be left out on that.
I think that we should discuss first of all Brother's Keeper, if you will.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about Brother's Keeper and also the art form that you've developed here.
Right. I mean, Brother's Keeper came out of a newspaper article from the New York Times in 1990. It was the story of Delbert Ward, who was accused of suffocating his bedmate brother, Bill, to death. The townspeople could not believe that he could have done this to his best friend and to his the guy that really ran the farm. There were 4 brothers, and they lived the way people did 100 years ago. Except for television, that was the only nuance of the 20th century in their lives. They didn't even have a bathroom or an outhouse. I mean, they basically lived the way people did, like I said, 100 years ago. The fact that these townspeople who had ostracized them most of their lives raised $10,000 in a day for his bail because they could not believe that one of their own could have done this, intrigued us, because it really was not what you would expect from a rural community, at least in the stereotypes we all have of rural communities. So it was important that that was part of what the story would be, but what most important, Tomas, is that it could be told in the present tense. What Joe and I do, and I think we do well, is we find interesting subcultures, interesting stories that are going on that have a clear beginning, a middle, and end, like a good fiction film, but it has the qualities of nonfiction because you're dealing with real-life situations. So the blending and the melding of the two art forms of fiction and nonfiction is what we do, as well as, there are people like Errol Morris, and there are people like Michael Apted from time to time, and Jenny Livingston, and the guys that did Hoop Dreams, who pushed the envelope of documentary wide enough to get into a theater so that people will come and spend $7 or $6 or $8 in the big cities to see a film. And I think it's rare that nonfiction crosses over into the theaters, and the reality is that only 3 or 4 films like ours are released a year.
Well, I think you hit upon it. When I think of documentary, I think of A&E on cable television.
Right.
And something that happened 25 or 30 years ago, and they have a narrator, and he brings back these old footage, so to speak.
Exactly.
Yours is a little different.
Well, ours is an experience for people. The difference between a traditional documentary is that it's usually about something that's already happened. So it's a retrospect back on a particular situation. World War II, the Holocaust, the war in the Pacific, Delano Roosevelt's Life. What we do is we follow a story from as close to the beginning as we can get. Obviously, in Paradise Lost and Brother's Keeper, there's a murder or murders that take place that is the inciting incident. And we're usually down there within a week or 2 of the arrest or the murders themselves, and we can follow it to its natural conclusion, which is in both cases a trial.
How do you get access?
Well, access is a difficult thing when you're dealing with people in a highly emotional state. But Joe and I are basically very good people, and I think what comes across to us and to them is that we're not there to take advantage of them there. We're not there to sensationalize what's going on. Where the local press has to get news bites and sound bites for the papers and for the TV and radio each night, we didn't. Ours was an ongoing process, and in fact our films don't come out until years after the event is done, so they don't have to concern themselves about something they say in private being on the news that night. For example, the Mother's Day, and for people who don't know what Paradise is Lost, I mean, I'll just give you a brief little thumbnail sketch. It is the story of 3 8-year-old boys who were murdered in West Memphis, Arkansas. Just imagine, you know, 2 weeks after your son is killed and it's Mother's Day and you're coming out of church and there's a local news crew, thrusts a camera in your face and says, how does it feel to spend your first Mother's Day without your son? That is the opposite of what we do. What we do is we spend time with them, and the access you're talking about, for every hour we get on film, we spend 10 or 15 hours with these people just talking to them, being there for them in a most difficult time. And when traditionally when people die, people come to the house with coffee cakes and casseroles, and they sit and they talk and they hold hands. Well, weeks afterwards they disappear. But Joe and myself and our small crew remained, and we were there all the way to the end. So if they needed to talk, if they needed to get something off their chest, we were there. Whether we were filming or not, we were always there for these people.
You had a continuity.
Yes, we were there. It's not that we became friends necessarily with these people, because you can't become friends with everybody you film. You have respect for them as human beings, but not everybody you meet do you like. But at the same time, it's cathartic for them to have us around to talk about things that, in some cases, they said they couldn't even say to their minister or their husband and wife.
They got a comfort level with you.
Yeah, and a safety factor, because in many ways we disappear after a while. We will go away.
Hold that point. We'll be back in a moment. All right, let's continue with making the film.
Right.
After getting past the family, how did you go on the next step with the trial and the attorneys, the judge, the police officials?
Well, I mean, for those who come to see the film, and I hope it's opening in New Jersey, all over in about 5 different cities in New Jersey this Friday.
Before we skip past that, where in New Jersey is opening?
It's going to be at the Claridge Cinema in Montclair. It's going to be at the Washington Cinemas in Washington Township. It's opening. That's
up in Bergen County?
That's in Bergen County. Then in, I think, Somerset, it's going to be at the Rocky Hill screen in Montgomery. And then we're playing the Voorhees, in Voorhees, the Ritz.
The Ritz in Voorhees?
Yeah.
You're playing the Ritz in Philadelphia, too,
as well, on October 11th.
Okay.
Brothers Keeper was a great calling card for us,
okay,
because we gave copies of the film to all of these, and besides the awards that we won and the Siskel and Ebert 2 thumbs up and all that kind of stuff, it really showed how we dealt with a very emotional and sensitive situation, and how we handled ourselves with attorneys and the judge in the courtroom.
Both sides.
Both sides, yeah. We don't believe that you can make a film dealing with such a sensitive subject and only show one side of it. There are some traditional documentarians who criticize our work for not having a point of view. And I consider that to be a load of crap, because we feel that the audience gets to serve as the jury. You get to watch this film and make up your own mind. I can't stand when documentarians feel that you have to grab somebody and take them to your point of view, and if they don't get your point of view, then they're wrong.
Right.
And we don't make films that way. We trust our audiences are intelligent enough to make their own sort of decisions. Getting back to your point about access with the attorneys and the prosecution, we had the judge in the case in West Memphis, called the judge in Munnsville, New York, that presided over Delbert's case in Brothers Keeper, talk about how Joe and I and our small crew would behave in the courtroom, as well as having the prosecution and the attorneys call the people who are their counterparts in upstate New York.
Right.
And they all said, look, these guys are professional. They handle themselves professionally in the courtroom. They don't make a spectacle of themselves. They're very quiet. And basically, although the trial was in January, we did not get permission to film in the courtroom until a week before the trial started. So as we talked about before, there's always that leap of faith, because at any one moment the rug can be pulled out from under you, and you don't. These films would not be as interesting and as provocative without being inside the courtroom, without being inside the eye of the storm and behind the scenes when, you know, the prosecution is talking to family members about trying to get one of them to turn state's evidence against each other, or just moments that we probably shouldn't be at, but we are because of the way we handle ourselves. I think if you handle yourselves responsibly and professionally and with a deal of sensitivity, you can get into places that perhaps you shouldn't be in. And it creates a little bit of a conflict for Joe and I, because I know, God forbid, anything ever happened to my family or a close friend, I would never allow a film crew like my own to come in. Never.
You must develop a point of view.
About guilt or innocence of these people,
yes.
in a sense.
Yes.
Well, I think in Paradise Lost,
and you try to stay away from that.
you will not see it in our film,
right.
You know, so clear cut. But obviously, I'm a human being and I have opinions. I believe that these three children, these three young adults, I should say, that were accused.
I don't know whether we need it or not.
What?
I think the people should see the picture first.
Okay. Well, you'll get your own opinion of it. But yes, you do have your own opinion. But when you get into the editing room, you have to show both sides. And if you're doing a disservice to your audience by telling them what to think. Although I do have a point of view about the guilt or innocence and whether these kids were railroaded or whether they got a fair trial, that's something you, as an audience, will pick up as you watch the film. But I think our truth or our feelings bubble to the top by the time you're finished watching the film. I don't think there's any one right answer, and that's why I think the films are strong, because you leave the theater and you go home and you think about it. Unlike most Hollywood fast food filmmaking that entertains you on a Friday night where you sort of check your brain at the theater door, you need to carry your brain into these movie theaters that show this film, because they're interesting. There's many subplots. It deals with so many issues. You need to think about it, but at the same time it's provocative and you're entertained emotionally. Not just on a ha-ha-ha, chuckle, mystery kind of thing.
I myself said to you earlier, you have to see it 2, 3, maybe 4 times to really get all the nuances and everyone's feelings. That's my personal opinion.
Well, it is full of information that is not hammered over to you like a traditional documentary. You will never find narration in our films. We will not have somebody say, and on this day this happened, and you should think this, and this is why we're doing this. No, we're fortunate enough to get people interesting in our films that are so interesting and so fascinating that they tell the story in their own words, not just in interviews like we're talking about,
right.
but in scenes, in cinema verite scenes, in the most intense moments of their lives. We're there. And I think that's something that is fascinating for a viewer, and I think that it's a good watch. I mean, you go to this movie, I can guarantee you will not be, you might be outraged by certain things and find certain things to be very disturbing, but it is an experience I don't think you will regret, you know, paying your $6 for.
What I think is interesting, a couple of our crew members had seen it, and they started to rave about it once this interview started.
Right.
When we come back, we're going to show a clip of the...
I think it's the trailer.
The trailer, is it? A full trailer? Great. We're going to show a trailer.
It says a lot about the film.
We'll be right back.